Hi, I'm Sam Greenfield, and I have a question. Did you ever like professional wrestling? Well, when I was a kid, my dad loved professional wrestling. This was in the middle 50s into the early 60s. He passed away in 62. He loved it. And the big star of professional wrestling at the time was a guy named Antonino Rocca. He was Italian. He was a huge superstar in the world of wrestling. When he died, thousands of people attended his funeral, and his funeral and death notice made the front page of New York newspapers. He was very acrobatic, very charismatic. Well, there was going to be a big wrestling match in D.C. at Griffith Stadium, which was the stadium where the Washington Redskins and the Washington Senators played. And it was great because you could go see both teams suck, because they did for decades. But not wrestling, no. And Griffith Stadium was small by today's standards. 28,869, I believe, was the total at the time we went to see this. Now, my father knew a couple of people in the world of wrestling. He knew Vince McMahon Sr., that's right, Vince McMahon of today's dad, who was a wrestling promoter. And he knew Jimmy Lake, who was the announcer. You know, when the microphone comes down, he was that guy. And Jimmy Lake also ran a strip club called the Gaiety. He was a little guy, and he used to wear a white tux jacket with a boutonniere, a carnation, and he ran a strip club. And one day my father, I'll never forget this, he was at Goldie Ahern's, who was a local restaurateur, where Vince McMahon Sr. was right then at the time. And Jimmy Lake walked in, and he had blood on his lapel. And Vince McMahon Sr. said, "Jimmy, what's with the blood?" And Jimmy Lake said, "I had to punch out a drunk." God. So anyway, this big match was really exciting because my dad was going to take me. And he said to Jimmy Lake, "Can you do us anything for the tickets?" And Jimmy Lake looked at my father and said, "Drop by the box office half an hour before the wrestling match at Griffith Stadium, and I'll get you really good seats." Now, good seats were important to my father, not because he was trying to show off for me, but because my father was blind in one eye, so getting close was important. So we show up a half an hour before, and Jimmy Lake lied to my dad. Jimmy Lake gave my father 2 tickets and said, "Here you go, Robert." And we went, and we were in the last row of the stadium, and my father could barely make out shapes from that distance. I could. So when the big match came, which was between Antonino Rocca and Karl von Hess, who's an interesting guy. Karl von Hess's real last name was Lecketti, and he was not German, he was not Prussian. He, in fact, was an American who served in World War II on a Navy cruiser called the USS Montpelier, and he changed his name to Karl von Hess. And in those days, he was known as a heel. That was the trade name for someone who was a bad guy. And you got to remember, this was only like a little over a decade after World War II. So parading yourself around as a German who thought that Nazis were okay was very dangerous. And he changed his name to Karl von Hess. He was shot at. He was spit on. Somebody tried to burn him once. He was very unpopular. He was a true heel. But this was the big match, Antonino Rocca against Karl von Hess, and my father could not see it. So I decided I was going to do a play-by-play, and I told my dad exactly what was going on. Every punch, every dirty move by Karl von Hess. "Dad, he's reaching into his trunks and he's rubbing something into Antonino Rocca's eyes." And my father would go, "That son of a bitch." He loved Karl von Hess. He loved Antonino Rocca. Well, Rocca won the match. He got up on top of one of the turnbuckles, and did a big backflip and bam, nailed von Hess, and he won the match. And the place went crazy. And that was it. It was over. I mean, there were other matches before that, but that was the big match of the night. And we only lived a few blocks from Griffith Stadium, so we're walking home, and my dad said to me, "Did you have a good time?" I think he was upset, not so much at him getting screwed by Jimmy Lake, the liar, but that I didn't have a good time. Well, I was at a wrestling match with my dad. I was thrilled. I was upset for him. But I said, "I had a really good time, Dad. How was I? Was everything okay?" He goes, "You should be an announcer. You were terrific." Put his arm around me, gave me a squeeze. And we got home, and my mother said, "How was the wrestling match?" And my dad looked at me and said, "It was great, wasn't it, Sammy?" And I went, "Dad, it was fantastic. We had great seats and everything was terrific." And my father gave me a kiss on the head and said, "Gesundte schöne Cup," which means healthy, happy, pretty head, which means I love my boy, essentially. It was one of the best nights of my life. And I hope everybody listening has a time that they can share a great moment with their mom or dad, because that one was sure as hell mine. I'm Sam Greenfield. This is my YouTube channel, Sam Greenfield Has Questions. Subscribe. It's free. Wash your hands and have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.